Mr. President, fellows and guests, I'm not going to give you a whole story of the Cosmati tonight, but merely a sort of foretaste, as Paul said, for the volume which David and I are busy working on with a number of other colleagues who are contributing to this. The Cosmati subject at Westminster is a huge subject. And a number of fellows have contributed significantly to the study of this in the past, and it really began when William Burgess in 1863 started to talk about the shrine of Edward the Confessor and the Cosmati pavements in archaeological terms and try to understand something about them. Much of what he said was not actually correct, we now know, but then that was a very long time ago, and we have the benefit of a great deal more knowledge, historical and archaeological now. But anyway, Burgess really kicked it off. And then, as far as the study of the shrine is concerned, a fellow from the past, John O'Neal, did a major study of the shrine in the 1950s and early 60s to try and understand how it had been put together. Because the shrine was demolished at the dissolution in 1540, and then it was reconstructed again in the short period when Westminster Abbey became an abbey again in the late 1550s under Mary. So in 1557-58, Abbot Feckenham rebuilt the shrine from a heap of very damaged fragments. And O'Neal tried to work out how he got it wrong, how the shrine would have looked. Very important paper in Archaeologia for 1966. So that was the only real attempt that's ever been made to study the shrine in any sort of archaeological or detailed manner. Then we come on to a number of other scholars who worked on aspects of the shrine and the pavements, particularly Dick Foster, who is here tonight, my old friend, who did a great study of the main pavement in the late 1980s, what's called the Great Pavement, the Sanctuary Pavement. And he published that volume, which you have probably all seen, with the title Patterns of Thought, and the subtitle tells you that it is the Great Pavement at Westminster. Dick made a huge contribution to the study of the pavement, the first real archaeological contribution. And then subsequently has published other material on the Cosmati work, most particularly in a volume which came out after we held what we call the Cosmati Conference at the Courtauld Institute in 1998, when a number of scholars came together to discuss Cosmati matters, particularly relating to the Great Pavement, and papers were given and they were published and they were edited by our fellows Lindy Grant and Richard Mortimer. And a slim book, but containing some very weighty papers on matters Cosmati, from Dick Foster, Paul Binsky, David Carpenter, and several other scholars. And so that is the last serious publication that there's been on Cosmati work, but again, primarily limited to the Great Pavement. Other significant contributions have, of course, been included in other works. David Carpenter has written a great deal about the reign of Henry III and the works of that reign and how they affected Westminster Abbey and so on. Since David was brought up at Westminster Abbey, son of Dean Edward Carpenter Fellow, he knows the place pretty well. And then Paul Binsky has written a great deal too about Cosmati in various areas, and in particular in that volume, Westminster Abbey and the Plantagenets, which are a great volume that he produced. But for all of these and several others, and I should also mention my old friend Tim Tappan Brown, who wrote a number of papers on the pavements as well. For all of these, no one has actually tackled the subject of the Cosmati monuments as a group, nor have they ever been recorded in the past in a detailed archaeological manner. Lots of photographs, some fairly sketchy plans of them, like plans by the Royal Commission in the 1924 volume on Westminster Abbey, and so on, but not very accurate, not very detailed. And we needed to record in some considerable detail the great pavement in anticipation of the restoration and conservation scheme which was taking place, or due to take place, in the last decade. So this was a challenge. We needed an archaeological record of the great pavement, and that of course involved doing laser scanning and producing accurate plans and so on, and making a detailed record of all the conservation work that took place under the Abbey's head conservator, Vanessa Simeoni. And the whole Cosmati project was overseen by a committee that was set up, chaired by our fellow Richard Gem, for many years to get the great pavement working again. So that was the task. The Dean and Chapter wanted to see the pavements again. I mean, both the great pavement and the shrine pavement had been covered by carpets since the middle of the 19th century and were only from time to time exposed. And when we exposed the great pavement finally after the conservation scheme, and that was finished in 2010, Her Majesty the Queen said, "I've only seen it twice before in my reign." You know, so it was always covered up. And these magnificent works of 13th century art, unparalleled anywhere else in this part of the world, needed to be better known and, if possible, better displayed. Well, that is what we've been working on effectively since over the last 15 to 20 years, really. And my role has been trying to get the archaeology of these understood. And in getting that archaeology understood, we needed to illustrate them. And that, of course, is where my friend David Neal comes in as the past master of illustrator of mosaics. And you're all familiar, of course, with the great volumes that he and Stephen Koch produced on the Roman mosaics of Britain. And so now David has turned medieval against his wishes and has taken on the Cosmati mosaics. And that's a couple of the coffin lids in the great pavement, his paintings of them. And I should stress that David's paintings, of course, are actually line drawings, effectively, with every mosaic cube or impression of lost cubes marked, and then they are painted up. So they are not just artistic views in a general sense. They are very accurate archaeological records with a wonderful lifelike quality imparted by the very careful colouring that he does. Well, I'm going to go through the monuments fairly rapidly, and before I do that, I do just want to mention that we are indebted to a large number of people, mainly fellows, for their contributions in various ways to this project. We have recently had a magnificent contribution of work from Matthew Payne, who's become the Keeper of Muniments in succession to Richard Mortimer after he retired. And Matthew has produced us a great many more documents than are ever quoted, helping to understand the Cosmati monuments. Because one of the great problems about these is we don't actually know when most of the work was done. The great pavement bears the date 1268. The shrine bears a disputed date, which in an inscription that's now gone and lost, which is either 1269 or, as some want it, 1279. I'm not going to talk about all that today. That's a minefield of problems. But we are working towards a much greater understanding of the chronology as well as the archaeology of this set of monuments. And I think we now know the order in which they were constructed, which is a major step forward. So let us now look at what we are dealing with. I'm not going to talk about every monument under the sun. That's the great pavement in the centre of the sanctuary, upon which, of course, the coronations take place at the centre of that, where that great onyx disc is. The second pavement around the shrine is here, and that is damaged and parts chopped out by later tombs that have gone into it, because, as I said in the title here, as they exist today. So that's the condition in which we see that pavement. Then there is the shrine and the shrine altar, the high altar, and I've deliberately omitted the great stone screen because that doesn't come until the middle of the 15th century, which cuts the whole east end up. That was not there in the 13th century, and therefore there was a continuity from the sanctuary into the shrine. And we now have found, or David found, that there were steps there which took you up from the sanctuary to the shrine level. Today the steps are in doorways down here, but there were original steps just there. And then there are other important monuments related. Henry III, his great Cosmatesque tomb is there. And there is another tomb down here, the child's tomb, sitting in a niche in the wall, just down there. It's an ejected tomb. I think it came from that position there. It was ejected in the middle of the 15th century and put into the aisle. And probably the fabulous Limoges enamel tomb of William de Valence also almost certainly came from in the chapel here and was ejected out there to make way for the burial of Edward III, who was later put in there. So there's a set of monuments, Cosmati monuments. We are dealing with two pavements, a shrine, the reredos of the original altar, which is attached to the shrine, Henry III's tomb, the child's tomb there, the royal child's tomb, who almost certainly was John of Windsor, and possibly his infant brother, Henry. They only died a few years apart, and they were both under 6 when they died, and we think both of them are in there. And there is one other Cosmati monument in the floor down there, number 9, a floor slab, which is always said to be, two slabs there, always said to be the de Valence brother and sister, but it can't be, one of them can't be. The southern one is a de Valence because the remains of the inscription is there, but the northern one, I think, is actually Alfonso, the third son and heir of Edward I, who died at the age of 18. So we've got this assemblage of monuments, and in order to understand them, we had to look at the whole context of the sanctuary, the shrine, its architecture, and its history, and not simply to look at these as postage stamps stuck on the floor in these various places. Well, there's the great pavement. This is the day before the royal wedding when we took this, when it was all prepared and cleaned and beautifully polished after we'd finished the conservation scheme of 2008 to 10. And this is David's drawing of the matrix, the Purbeck marble framework into which all the mosaic goes. Now that framework consists entirely of strips of Purbeck marble joined together. So all these curved parts, they're all curved strips that butt up together. The exceptions are the two coffin lids or two tomb covers, one north, the south one there, and one north there. Those are huge slabs of Purbeck marble that are chiselled out to create a matrix into which the mosaic is set. There are one or two other pieces in roundels that are like that, but as well. But on the whole, it's a framework, and the mosaic is laid between the members of the frame. You will see these drawings, of course, all upstairs. David has brought a great array of most sumptuous mosaic drawings you could ever wish to set eyes on, and this is one of them, the great pavement, which shows it as it is today. Now, one of the things that's emerged out of this, and Dick Foster was the first person really to say all this, is that the mosaic inlay has had a history of alteration, and that there have been phases of repair and alteration. Not the framework, that's untouched. And David, in recording all this, has highlighted a lot of changes that we didn't even suspect before. So when you think of great Cosmati pavements in Italy, most of them have big plain roundels, like this one, that's that there, often with a mosaic border around. And we've got another one down there. But what we've got at Westminster is a lot of roundels that appear to have been tampered with and cut down. So, for example, this one, well, we've got a roundel here, but it doesn't actually fit in the mosaic. It's the wrong stone, and in order to put it in, somebody had to chisel off the points of half of the little triangles around here because the round they were putting in was too big. And it wouldn't go, so they just chopped the points off all the triangles, and some small tesserae disappeared altogether. Or in the case of this, and a whole lot of others, the roundel, and this was a breccia, again the same as that, the breccia roundel must have been taken out and then chopped into a geometrical form and put round it to fill in this border of Belgian red marble. Now, Belgian red marble does not occur in any of the medieval contexts at Westminster. It is always later. So wherever we've got it, and there's lots of it, we know somebody has tampered with things. The Belgian black marble, the dot at the centre, well, that would be all right, because Tournai marble, of course, is available in this country, certainly from the 12th century onwards. And so we have a lot of Belgian red marble that has been brought in and replacing a previous work. Somebody decided to change roundels into shapes, 6, 7, 8 sides. And this is something we are trying to get a handle on at the moment, the date of this. And a number of other changes too, but I'll say a little more about those in a moment. I've mentioned coffins. There are two great coffin lids under the north and south sides in the borders, and the northern one here, you see it as it exists today after conservation, and you see it here when I've taken Christopher Wilson's photograph and snipped it up and taken the picture out of it to show you what's underneath it. It's a monolithic coffin lid with links and chains attached in 4 places, so that you could pull it out of the ground to lift it up and get it off the coffin. The coffin is down underneath the floor, a Purbeck marble coffin, and in it is Abbot Ware, who died in 1283. So you see, when he died, the coffin had to be opened, and that's why it's got the rings, the lifting rings, to take the lid off to be able to put the body in when the abbot died. Ware was one of those who was instrumental in the whole Cosmati process at Westminster, and was abbot, of course, under the reign of Henry III, and so he created himself a burial place in the floor. So this is a major structure. We know that from radar that we've done on it that there is a body in there. We think we can identify the position of chalice and paten by the left elbow. There is potentially a crozier head with another area of metal showing up on the radar, because metal shows up quite well on radar. But of course no one can see it or ever will see it, because it will not be pulled apart for archaeological investigation. The southern coffin lid is a different kettle of fish altogether. Here it is. And it's been played about with because it's got these great stars of Belgian marble chopped in to it, where there should be in fact these small glass stars. These are all coloured glasses, these little stars there. So it's been cut open in 2 places and they've been put in. So that's another of the Belgian marble interventions. This, however, is a lid with no evidence that it's ever been taken out of the ground. The other one you can see how it's been taken out and put back. No evidence it's ever been taken out. No inscription to go with it. Sometimes said to be Abbot Wenlock, who was the next abbot along. It certainly isn't his, because we know where he is buried, and that is not here. I think it is, from the radar, it looks as though there's something different about it. There's a chamber under there, a rectangular chamber, but it's full of something. It's not got the great airspace that you expect above a decomposed body. My suspicion is that it may be an ossuary to contain the remains of significant individuals who had to be displaced when Henry III destroyed the sanctuary area of Edward the Confessor's church. And there were a number of significant individuals in there, and we do not know where any of them were buried, although recently Simon Keynes has been talking to me about the subject of Abbot Elfric, and we have begun to realise that there's a strong possibility, that's all I can say, can't prove it, that in fact the Roman coffin, the reused Roman coffin, first found in 1820 outside the Abbey, and there it is inside, that actually holds the abbot. We know this coffin had to have been moved by Henry III after 1251. It was brought out of the Abbey. We can now show the archaeological sequence. It was brought out of the Abbey and deposited outside against this wall, which was built in 1251. So this may be another clue to what's going on, because, as I say, there's a lot more to it than simply some mosaic tombs. The whole process of Henry destroying the confessor's great church, moving the bodies of the confessor and his queen and others, and the shrine, and reconstructing it. It's a great logistical process that went on for decades, and we are trying to elucidate all this and see how it works together. Well, to go back to the pavement, there are some other interesting changes where we've got some of these panels. A number of complete panels have been taken out. They've lost all their medieval mosaic and been replaced with very tightly fitting, beautifully cut marbles of various sorts. This is exactly what you'd expect to see as the top of a Pietra dura table. It's that sort of quality work. No mortar in the joints, absolutely tight fitting. And the question is, what date is it, 16th or 17th century? I think Dick Foster suggested that maybe this was material that came from the destroyed Palace of Whitehall and was reused. After all, we got the Whitehall altarpiece came to the Abbey, and that was then taken away again, dismantled. So we've got that phase of repair, and Paul Drury is helping us study this sort of Tudor and later work at the moment. But we also have another extraordinary thing here. This banding, that is all good 13th century work there, green and purple porphyry and cream limestone. But when we go down here to this bit, the colours change and it becomes much more muddy looking because it's not porphyry. We have got green serpentine and we have got a red Belgian marble, like that stuff around there. And instead of the tiny triangles that go in between those, and only people at the front will see that there are very tiny triangles in the borders, instead of tiny triangles all being cut and fitted together, what we have is a limestone triangle that's been made, then cut out inside it another triangle, so that it actually looks like three triangles and a central one. The central one then is filled with a mastic, either green or red, depending whether they were trying to imitate green or purple porphyry. So this is mastic-filled mosaic, which is something I think we don't have any other examples of it that I'm aware of, but there are examples of tombs and other structures with mastic filling in lettering and for embedding materials that are known from the 13th century onwards. So this is an extraordinary repair where somebody wanted to make this look like the original, but not actually copying it. So we've got all of these to explain, and we are still searching for some explanations. The unique thing, one of the unique things about the pavement is that it has inscriptions. Well, they are complicated and they refer to the origins and lifespan of the universe. The universe should end in 19,600 and a bit years, so it doesn't worry us just yet. And according to the inscriptions, and David has recorded all the letter forms and so on, so we've got the details of the Lombardic and Roman alphabets that are used in these. Then there is the shrine pavement, very battered, very damaged, normally kept covered. It still is. No solution to how to repair it has been found. And of course the shrine sitting upon it, and this end of the shrine is the reredos from the original shrine altar fixed on in a rather clumsy way. So that's another piece of Cosmati that's survived. The shrine pavement had never been drawn in any detail, and David has drawn here on the right-hand side the matrix. That's what survives Purbeck marble. Now, it's not strips of marble with mosaic put in between. It is marble solid all across, and it is made out of all these pieces. It is the scrapyard of the pavement makers. And you can see exactly what these are. All these strips are just under a foot wide, and that means they're no use for making 30 centimetre squares, because all the main paving of the Abbey under Henry III was in squares of either 30 centimetres or 45 centimetres, and anything less than 30 centimetres wide you can't make a paving square out of. So all these are the leftover strips, all put together tightly, no mortar, to try and create one solid sheet of Purbeck marble, into which this pattern was then chased, chiselled in situ, obviously once it had all been laid. Then the order in which construction was undertaken is apparent, and it's clear that there are two main axes, a north-south and an east-west, and that they are taken from the corner of this enormous slab, over 10 feet long, that slab of Purbeck marble, and the radar tells us that it covers a chamber, which may be the original burial chamber of the confessor. It's filled up with rubble. The entrance to it must be out here, which we can't get at because of the 15th century screen that sits on top of it now. But the chamber, of course, was well known. Henry III was buried in it for a while. Eleanor of Castile was buried in it for a while. So it remained an empty sepulchre that was available for reuse when somebody died and they were looking for a prestigious tomb space before a new tomb was constructed for that person. So this has turned out to be very helpful in trying to understand the topography of the whole shrine area, and to try to locate the position of the confessor's original burial. And we know underneath here, curving underneath, there is the apse. The presbytery apse of the confessor's church is under there. We know where it is. There's a manhole cover you can lift there and pop down and have a look at it. David's drawing here, which you'll see upstairs, a minute amount of detail on this. Very important, this piece of mosaic, because this is the finest part, the northern arm. And the mosaic work here incorporates a lot of glass, which is not a good thing for floors, but there's a lot of glass in here. And it's very much in tune with the glass mosaic work in the shrine here, and the glass mosaic in here in Henry III's tomb. In other words, we've actually got three things all joined together. Three things are joined together, two tomb structures and a floor that have a very similar structure and make great use of glass. So archaeologically, the connection is quite important. We can also show that the order in which things happened. The tomb base was put in first. The tomb was stood on top of it. The pavement was constructed around here, and then Henry III's tomb was built on the top, lapping over the pavement. Then the pavement was chiselled out to put the pattern in. So we've got an order in which events took place, which is very helpful for thinking about the chronology of these constructions. The pavement has often been regarded as not very good, as inferior to the other pavement. Well, of course, that is nonsense, and was what was generated by Burgess, who said it was probably made by Englishmen after the Italians had gone. Well, it's no such thing. It is a highly skilled, magnificent Italian pavement, and it's just like some of the other Italian pavements, an example here, based not on big geometric schemes with lots of great roundels and rectilinear lines, but on small roundels and these curved S-shaped bands of mosaic. Very simple reason why this is done. You couldn't put a geometric pavement in that space. It's a funny shaped space, and it tapers on the sides, and anything geometrical involving large squares and rectangles just wouldn't work. So you go for an all-over carpet design, which is exactly what's been done here. And so it is part and parcel of the finest work, not something inferior and later. Then the shrine itself. Now that's caused a great deal of concern, partly because it's rebuilt and not entirely correctly after the dissolution, but it's survived, and that is the great thing about it. It's survived, and it has the body of Edward the Confessor inside it in the upper chamber there. The construction of the shrine is interesting because it is based on very large slabs of Purbeck marble. And not many slabs, a spine wall, and one big slab it all sits on, that's one slab underneath. A spine wall, shorter dividing walls and piers here for the arches, and then these huge long slabs which run from there right the way down there, so one each side, great long single slabs cut out with the trefoil-headed arches for these recesses. And then they have vaulting on the inside, which O'Neilly showed here. These are O'Neilly's drawings. So in many ways, the form of it is a traditional English Gothic shrine, until if you don't think about mosaic. So it has the usual number of niches or kneeling spaces, and it has Gothic arches to it. Then inside it has. There's the eastern end one. There are 7, you see, 3 arches on either side, 1 on the east end. But when you look at this, the form of the arch is exactly the same as the form of Henry III's wall arcading all round the eastern part of the Abbey church. That is the Child's Cosmati tomb inserted later, so forget that for the moment, but that is what we're looking at. So the shrine, the openings here echo the niches in the walls around the ambulatory. Then the spine wall down the middle of the shrine has on both sides of it these details. When you're inside one niche, you're looking at these. So this is this one. And so they're highly decorated, covered of course in mosaic, and hence very Italian, but the form isn't of course Italian. What you're actually looking at here, inside these Gothic arches, is a 2-light window. So you've got 2 uncusped lights carrying a sex foil in the tracery. And it's very interesting to note that this is done in 2 different ways. On the south side of the slab, all the sex foil openings, they run through, so there is no connection. What you're seeing on there is in fact the indents where a mosaic was put in, but they are cusped, all of those. On the north side, there are no cusps. The circles are all completely separate. It's like plate tracery, drilled holes through the plate. And so what seems to have happened is that one side of the great slab was being cut to create Gothic 2-light windows, which I suggest would have had completely blank backs, which would have had saints painted on the Purbeck marble, and then the decision was made to go Cosmati. And so the backs of all the niches were then chiselled out deeper to be able to put Cosmati mosaic in. The patterns that they applied didn't fit, so the patterns, they started at the bottom and they just petered out, hitting the tracery any old how. But by the time the slab was turned over to cut out the northern face, they didn't cut any cusps, because by that time it was known these were going to contain glass or Cosmati roundels, and therefore the whole tenor of the monument was changing. So there's just 2 things about this shrine, apart from its form, which say Gothic. All the rest, of course, is classical. All the mouldings, all the shafts, the pilasters, the capitals, everything. There's nothing Gothic there. But so these are the roughing out stages of what was going to be a Gothic shrine, and it's probably about 1262 or 3. The change occurs when it's decided to go Cosmati and to abandon the Gothic form. There's a lot of useful historical references that go right back to 1241 concerning the creation of the new shrine and ferretry. And 1241 is 4 years before Henry started the demolition of the Confessor's Church. So he's starting the shrine, which is the most important thing to him, before he's even got the building knocked down. And we have this string of references. Matthew Payne's found a lot more for us now that help us understand that this is a long process, and that at some stage, and it's, I say, early 1260s, we think, Cosmati became the new order of the day. Well, those arches, those two light Gothic windows, are of course exactly what's all round the shrine when we look around the ambulatory and the transepts. So when the shrine was going to be a wholly Gothic structure, it emulated the architecture all around it, as one might reasonably expect it would. Different kettle of fish when we come to Henry III's tomb, because this, when this was started, the order was clearly that it was going to be a classical tomb with Cosmati, because it is a perfectly classical structure in every detail except one. And that one detail is this little Gothic head, just a pair of them, to these two openings in the lower chamber. The central one, beautifully pedimented classical opening, very similar to what you see on plenty of monuments in Italy. So there's this one little nod to doing something Gothic, but it must have been simply a nod to the Gothic, because the whole structure of this and all the mouldings, all the columns and details, everything is non-Gothic. So the application of these little curious little arches is interesting. They're not tall and pointed like the other ones we've just been talking about, because you couldn't put a tall pointed arch comfortably in a rectangular panel like this. So they copied the other arch that Henry's masons had used. There in St Faith's Chapel, it is the head of the piscina. So we've got, again, an exact link across there. That's what they've copied. But everything else has been, say, classical. Cross in the back, mosaic cross set in the back. Not much mosaic left in it now. Now the detail of Henry's tomb is superlative. And as you can see here, the wonderful capitals, all with their upright leaves, no stiff leaf Gothic foliage or anything like that here. The detailing is beautifully preserved, particularly on the north side of the shrine, because that's the side that faces out into the ambulatory, and you can't reach it to damage it, which is the simple reason for its salvation, because the shrine area is 5 feet above the ambulatory floor level. So when you stand in the ambulatory floor, you can pick up and damage and take tesserae out up to the height a human hand will reach. But then there's another 3 feet or so that you can't reach. And so no damage up there, or very little damage, as you will see. There we are, above the height to which pilgrims and pilferers could collect, all this mosaic work surviving. Now, Henry's tomb, as David has pointed out to me, is really the most sumptuous piece of work. It's actually possibly more sumptuous than the shrine itself. So Henry was putting great effort into his own tomb. And this is all glass, of course. Glass mosaic with gold foil on it in places. And of course the matrix is again Purbeck marble. The largest pieces of purple porphyry that you would probably ever see in Britain are on the north and south sides of the tomb. 2 great slabs which have survived. Now, the east end of Henry's tomb is very important for showing something to do with the constructional history. Again, like the shrine, Henry's tomb is made of big blocks of Purbeck marble. There aren't many joints, and the joints that there are all held together with wrought iron cramps set in lead. It's not a mortar construction. But there were a couple of places where the slabs were not big enough to make a complete end, and there had to be a join. And so there's a horizontal joint in the Purbeck marble through there. And what we see here is that the join is covered with a rather poor piece of mosaic work. And this confirms what we knew should be the case, namely that all these panels of mosaic were not made on site at all. They were made in a workshop, and they were made like this chap is doing it, a Marmorarius, who is creating a mosaic panel. It's on trestles here, and you create the panel, put all the mosaic work in, then take it and put it into the monument that you want. Well, of course, if you've got to join panels, you can't get a perfect junction there initially. So you leave a row or two rows of tesserae off the edge of your two panels. You put the panels together, and then the mosaic worker comes back and pops in the pieces to close the gap. Well, he popped them in, and he used pieces of glass that were of a different shade of blue from the rest. They were badly cut, they were rectangular rather than square, there's a lot of mortar in between and so on. In other words, it's bodging it in to fill the joint. Now, the critically important thing about this is that it demonstrates beyond any shadow of doubt that the shrine and Henry's tomb were actually made in a tomb workshop. Well, we know there was a tomb workshop later on in the southern part of the Abbey precinct, because they made the tomb there for Henry VIII, the tomb that never got put into Windsor. And so there was a tomb house, as it was called, and somewhere there would have been in the 13th century a workshop in the precinct that made all this. What it means is you can get the whole of these structures ready in advance so that once the building is ready to receive them, you can put them up quickly. And this is important because a number of writers have said, oh, it took decades to finish the tomb and the shrine, and nothing was finished at the time of the great dedication in 1269. Well, that just isn't true, because once you come to put these in, it's not a month's work, less than a month to put the whole lot up when it all arrives inside the building. So this is very important in understanding chronology. Now, Henry III's tomb, I will be brief about this, is more than a tomb. It's a shrine as well. It is a double-deck structure. The lower deck, here, the lower chamber, is a shrine with these niches in it. The upper chamber is the burial, and Henry's coffin is inside there, slab on top, and then his gilt Latin effigy on top of that. Now, it's always been assumed that it didn't have a canopy, but apart from there's a much later timber one that hangs above it now. But it is obvious when David and I were looking at this that on this ledge, this great broad ledge around here, which separates the upper chamber from the lower chamber, there are the setting out marks on particularly that back corner, the northwest corner, to show where the column base stood, and that it was an 8-inch square column base which would support a column about 6 inches in diameter. And so, in other words, it was a ciborium type of canopy which stood on that ledge, and that's exactly what you'd expect, and that's exactly what the Italian parallels are. We then asked the question, well, haven't we got the column pieces? Because there, supporting the reredos of the shrine altar now, are two columns that are nothing to do with the shrine or its altar, and they were put there in the 16th century as supports, and they are in fact much longer than they appear now. They stand out of the ground to a height of about 3 feet. But Gilbert Scott dug them up and took them out and found there was another 2 feet below. And so, in fact, they are 5 foot high columns, exactly what you would want. 4 of them we would want, we've only got 2 at the moment, but 4 of them to carry a canopy on the shrine, which then brings it entirely in with the expected form of such a tomb. So it is a tomb shrine. Henry, of course, anticipated he would become a saint just like Edward the Confessor. He was working towards that, and, well, it's a complicated story, but we won't go into tonight. So the final tomb that we've got is this little child's tomb, which is probably John of Windsor and his little brother. We believe that there are 2 coffins inside it, and it's tucked under an arch here. Very interesting, different sort of mosaic. That's the top slab. Different colours. It's basically a sort of black and gold appearance rather than the reds and greens. And we're fairly sure that it's actually the last Cosmati monument made, and they are using up, not only for the top, but more particularly for the sides, the dregs of what's left over, a mixture of different pieces of Cosmati mosaic, opus sectile, glass, some of it the French and Limoges type glass, but some of it is apparently English glass, and it's green. So it's a hodgepodge of one thing and another, and marks the end of the Cosmati era. And I did just mention that there's this problem of a little piece of a tomb slab in the shrine with mosaic in it, which is always called de Valence, but may actually be Alfonso, Edward I's third son. So in a nutshell, this needs to be redrawn. We think we now understand relatively how all this lot worked, and that there was access to the shrine from behind the high altar where the steps were. Actually, the altar now needs moving forward a bit. I drew this some years ago, and it's about to be revised. But we are getting a handle on all of this. The canopy has caused a certain amount of interest on top of the shrine. This very battered thing, which looked like that in 1937, but after Dijksbouwer had utterly ruined it with his restoration in 1958 to 60, it now looks like that. But there's been a lot of debate about what age it was. O'Neil said it was pre-dissolution, and he's right. And we think it's probably 1516 in date, when we know that all the new ropes for hauling it up from great long ropes coming down from the high vault above, new ropes were bought and work done on pulleys and the winch and so on that operated it. So in order to have a proper look at this, we persuaded the Dean to allow us to close the chapel, scaffold it, and take the canopy off the shrine. It comes off in 3 pieces. That's the lower part, that's the upper part, and then there's the top of it goes on over there. And we took it apart to have a look and to study the structure of the shrine so that we could get the drawings right of its interior, and to sort out the age of this over-restored canopy. And there is something very interesting about it, and I welcome any comments anyone can make, because O'Neil pointed out that this is a most unusual arch. It's a semicircular arch that's been split and spread, basically, in the West End. And another absolute copy of this, or it's a copy of the other one, is the screen in King's College Chapel, Cambridge. It has got this same arrangement of pilasters, flanking arches going to either side, and this drawn out sort of split arch in the middle. And the King's College screen is mid-1530s. So the study of the canopy is as another aspect. It's mosaic again, because it's full of glass mosaic here. So we've got a late mosaic material there. I'm not going to talk about the coffin and that. That's another whole story. We were able to study and record the 1685 outer coffin that James II ordered to be the confessor to be put into. But we've got all that now understood and recorded. And with the assistance of Lisa Monas, we've started to look at the subject of the textiles and so on, because this has never been properly published, any of this. 11th century Byzantine textiles from the tomb, robbed out in 1685, along with a number of other things. So understanding the tomb and the way that the confessor has been moved around is a story for the future. We can't go into that in detail now. I've talked for far too long. David is going to say a word or two, and then we are going to adjourn upstairs, where you can see all his wonderful paintings.
Thank you, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, guests. Well, it's taken 5.5 years, and it's almost finished, the completion of the surveys of all these monuments. I'm not going to go into them in detail because Warwick has already done that in part. However, just something to say something about the actual painting and recording of these. With the 2 main floor mosaics, I had the fortune of having the AutoCAD plots, so I could trace those off. And using those plots, I was able then to draw onto them every tessera, and then made a colour code. And with the aid of hundreds of photographs, I worked up the drawings in my studio at home. It's very different, of course, from drawing a Roman mosaic because you've got such a variety of different stones and different finishes. And I must admit, when I first started, I was rather bewildered. However, time went on, and I gradually got more and more used to it. Now, the main mosaic that you've just seen, because Warwick has already pointed this out, that it's full of inconsistencies. So, in my mind, they've started off with the intention of introducing the roundels, such as Warwick pointed out, with the circular slabs of marble surrounded with tessellation. Some of the slabs were prefabricated and cut into Purbeck marble, with chased Purbeck marble. But as time went on, as you move south and east, you get an inferior quality in the mosaic. And the same applies to the mosaic in the tomb of Edward the Confessor, around the tomb of Edward the Confessor. Again, Warwick has already pointed out that whether you have glass in the northern half and marble in the northern half, but mainly white lias, British white lias in the southern part. One of the most fascinating things to my mind about these monuments is the Feckenham's reconstruction in the 1560s. It was put back incorrectly, but Feckenham employed probably an Italian to restore it. And as you can, so when it was put back, we're looking at the east end of the tomb of Edward the Confessor. This bit was lost, so he put 2 sheets of Purbeck marble and had it painted inside. So all this decoration which you see here was copied exactly by Feckenham's Italian, assuming he was Italian. And the original mosaic, the original monument, is very strange, especially at this end, at the east end, because the guilloche pattern on the north is not replicated on the south. Here you have a standard chain guilloche, and here it's a chain variety. And at the point here, this pattern was a very fine chevrons. This was another pattern altogether, but Feckenham had it all painted in the same style with the zigzags, much larger than the original workmanship. He also had the ends of these panels decorated, so this panel was completely reconstructed by Feckenham here and here. And this is the decoration that you see again by Feckenham on the west end of Henry's tomb. I've spoken enough. I'm going to invite you to see the exhibition upstairs in the library. I urge you, please, please, please do not touch any of the paintings, because I don't want your greasy finger marks over them, if you don't mind what I'm saying. So any comments you wish to make and ask, then ask me upstairs. Thank you.